Good morning, Tallahassee. Time for Wake Up War Chant on 97.9 ESPN Radio.
That's right, ladies and gentlemen, from Tallahassee to Thomasville and from coast to Atlantic coast. It's time to Wake Up War Chant here on 97.9 ESPN Radio, and it's a very, very happy Wednesday morning, July the 19th, to you and yours. You're currently listening to the voice of Ryan Kelly. I'm the director of digital media at warchant.com. Drew Hicken is on the other side of the glass. He's pushing the buttons, making things work, as always. Drew, it's good to have you back with us, my friend.
Yep, good to be back.
Okay. Hey, but anyway, thanks so much for waking up with us here 6 a.m. on 97.9 ESPN Radio. And, of course, streaming devices, tune in, WTSM, however it is. Podcast, iTunes, Podcast Republic, YouTube now. Go on down the line. You have your place by now. If you've rated and subscribed, just given us a good review, we certainly thank you for it. And then, of course, if you want to reach out to the show, it's radio@warchant.com or at Wake Up War Chant. So usually we try to lead off with something very, very Florida State specific, something kind of right in the wheelhouse, especially as we get closer to football season and fall camp goes away. But we'll get to that in a second. But this morning, something kind of caught my eye when I was going through prep, going through some of these things. And it's actually a national piece on Rivals.com from our friend, the self-proclaimed godfather of recruiting, Mr. Mike Farrell. Does a recurring column that you've probably read before called the 3-Point Stance, where he just kind of talks about three big topics that he's got going on in the world of college sports or just in the world of sports in general. And one of his topics on yesterday's column is hot seats in the SEC. And he went and he power ranked every single one of those guys. How much trouble are they in? Who in the SEC is in the most risk of being shown the door this year? Meanwhile, when just kind of stumbling, doing some prep, there was an article about the ACC from Andrea Adelson over at ESPN.com, talking about how this is the first time in quite some time that the ACC is going into a kickoff and there's no real big, huge question marks, and every single coach has stayed. And I thought that was really, really funny. And it was something interesting and worth talking about and worth processing when you look at the idea that the ACC has really tried to make their case over the last week. Jimbo Fisher, Dabo Swinney, and heck, they've tried to do it for a while, but I think this is the first time that they were really emboldened in saying it the way they did. And I think it's really the first time that many in the media paid attention and didn't say, yeah, sure, whatever, you're just saying that to say it. That the ACC, at least last season, made a claim that they are the best conference in the country. And, of course, whenever you're talking about the best conference in the country, you got to have stability in the top first. And I know this has been somewhat of a discussion online, Twitter for the last couple days, in terms of you've got to have a dominant team at the top of your conference if you want anybody to give you the time of day. You have to have an Alabama, or you have to have a Florida State, or you have to have a Clemson, but you have to have more than that. You have to have most of your power programs on all cylinders. You have to have more than one. It cannot just be an Alabama. It cannot just be a USC like Pac-12, like then Pac-10 found out in the mid-2000s. There has to be a Florida State. There has to be a Clemson. It has to be an LSU and Alabama and Georgia. It has to be a combination it has to be Texas and Oklahoma and Nebraska once upon a time in the old Big 12. It has to have your power brand names running at peak efficiency.
Yeah, in college football nowadays, so much the conference glory kind of just goes along with where your top teams are. It's not even necessarily about how deep or how much depth a conference has anymore. It's about, do you have 1, 2, 3 contenders near the top? Because if that's the case, that's when people are really going to talk about you now. If you don't have a team that's competing near the top of the playoff rankings, a lot of people aren't going to take you too seriously as a conference if you say, hey, we're the deepest and best conference. Well, nobody really cares anymore. It's more necessarily, like you said, about your top. Now, depth is important, and you shouldn't have just, a bunch of trash teams. I'm just saying, if you do want to have if you do want to have that discussion on saying that your conference is the best conference, no one's going to take you seriously unless you have the Florida State and the Clemsons and the Louisvilles or, all those teams.
Well, I think it goes back to, and I'm happy you brought that up, because I think to a certain extent having the top, having everybody at the top with their decks in a row and everything lined up has a trickle-down effect. I really do think this is a trickle-down football-nomics in that a conference does need a good middle to truly have a great claim. I mean, Florida State and Clemson can win all the games they want, but if everybody else is going out and getting smashed and Louisville's not good and North Carolina's not living up to its potential and Wake Forest is winning 3 games a year, people are still going to turn a blind eye anytime you argue about that conference. But when your conference is top, when the Florida States, the Clemsons, the Louisvilles, when they're running at peak efficiency, there's something almost to strive for. And there's something for the middle to say, hey, we need to invest money in this because we're missing out on this gravy train. If 3 of these guys are doing all this, and it's not just one, it's not, oh, woo, yay, great, an outlier. If there's proven success in our conference from multiple programs, we need to put money in this. We need to invest in this. And I think you've seen a good bit of that in the ACC over the last couple years. With Clemson emerging, with Florida State returning to what it's been, to what it was once under Jimbo Fisher, and now with Louisville. Tom Jurich, do not underestimate. I don't know if Bobby Petrino's the guy at Louisville, but I do know this. I know Louisville's athletic department will do everything in their power to put the Cards right up there with Florida State and Clemson. That's just kind of how well run they are.
Right, and the other thing you have to look at, too, is when you're near the top of that playoff bracket, your conference is talked about. If you don't have those teams, your conference just kind of falls through the cracks, and a lot of people just they don't bring it up too much. It's just, and the success is always, how do they do it? People like to put success mainly based off of bowl performance, which I think is silly, but that happens so often when they say, oh, look, the ACC went 7-1 in bowl games, or they did this in the playoff, or this and that. And I think it's so interesting to see nowadays. Like you said, the middle is so important, but we've seen it time and time again, especially really in the SEC, where you have the Alabama near the top, and they just have this foregone conclusion that they're the best conference in the nation by so many people. They just dub it that year in and year out. When really they have had a lot of really, really bad teams in that conference year after year of late, and people don't talk about it too often because Bama is always there and kind of making them look good. And when it's not Bama, it's normally Auburn or Florida. It's somebody else near the top, or Texas A&M doing something to kind of keep that conference near the top of the discussion.
And it has gotten to that point where it's the SEC kind of feels like it's mid-2000s USC-dominated Pac-10. Or it kind of feels like it's early 2010s Oklahoma-dominated Big 12. Because look at LSU over the last couple of years. They've been mediocre, subpar. That defense hadn't been what it's used to be. That offense has still been a mess. They've been horrible to watch. Florida, I mean, of course, we've had Schadenfreude at those problems for quite some time, but Florida hasn't had a quarterback in almost a decade now. Georgia has been a non-factor since they lost that 2012 SEC title game. Auburn, let's face it, Gus Malzahn is a kick six not happening away from probably not having a job at the moment. Ole Miss, Hugh Freeze, the number one coach on the hot seat according to Mike Farrell's three-point stance column, accumulated all that talent, got all those guys together, and you want to know what he's done with it? Absolutely nothing. Texas A&M, who supposedly has about as much talent as anybody and is supposed to be one of the top players in the SEC because of all the money, because of all the infrastructure, because of all the fan and the booster support, nothing. None of these guys have really lived up to the expectations, and I get it. The SEC expectations are partially a victim of its own success, partially a victim of, well, we won so many titles in a row, and Alabama does it all the time. Why can't you guys do it? But I think the problem is there's a lack of patience sometimes when you do have a good guy and you know you have a good guy. And it's also the idea that you sometimes just got to wait this out. You sometimes have to wait this out. And that's another great point about Florida State and Clemson. You know, Florida State was good for 3 years. I don't know if you'd call the 2010, the 2011, or the 2012 teams elite. 2013 happened, and then 2014 happened, and then 2016 at the end, you saw signs of another elite football team, and now Florida State's ranked itself in the top 5 again. Clemson, let's not forget, after year 2, I believe it was, lost to South Florida in the Meineke Car Care Bowl, a bowl that doesn't even exist anymore, at least not with that name. And they were ready to fire Dabo Swinney and send him out the door. And then the Orange Bowl happened, where they got 70 hung on them by West Virginia. That didn't happen for Clemson overnight. They knew it was a process. And the thing is, everybody wants to be so good right now. And I think that's true. But the thing is, look at some of these guys in the ACC. It's going to be a process for Mark Richt at Miami. It's going to be a process for Justin Fuente at Virginia Tech. It's going to be a process for a couple of these folks to get up. And you look at it. When you look at the coaches on the hot seat in the SEC, you go up and down and you kind of think to yourself, yeah, there's a lot of guys who could legit be fired this year. Hugh Freeze could legit be fired. Kevin Sumlin, legit be fired. Butch Jones, legit be fired. Gus Malzahn, if the Stidham thing doesn't work out, could be fired. Brett Bielema, probably. Barry Odom at Missouri, of course he might. Derek Mason, who knows? I don't think Jim McElwain's getting fired. I think it would take a horrendous season for Dan Mullen to be fired because they just love that guy over there. Mark Stoops, probably fine. Kirby Smart's fine. Muschamp's fine. Orgeron's fine. Saban's fine. That's almost half the conference that you legitimately could feel at the end of the year might get fired. When right now in the ACC, unless there's just something horrendous that happens at one of these places or something off the field, who do you think could be fired in the ACC this year? Because the way I look at it, it's probably just Paul Johnson and Dave Dorn. Those are the only two that really kind of seem to me are guys that, yeah, they might get shown the door. I mean, but here's the thing. Even though I say that, Dorn looked like he was going to get fired at the end of last year. NC State goes on this crazy run to save his job and upsets North Carolina and Chapel Hill. And every time we tend to think that it's almost curtains for Paul Johnson, he rattles off 9 to 10 wins. That just kind of seems to be the nature of the beast with him. So you know what? Folks have said for years that Alabama can't pull a conference on its own, and I think you're starting to kind of read the tea leaves that it turns out they're right. And the SEC needs somebody. They need Georgia or LSU or Florida to get a quarterback if they even want to come close to getting to average folks' perception that they're the best league again.
Yeah, and it's just interesting. To me, the most interesting case in the SEC has to be Texas A&M. I mean, you saw someone run these 2 5-star guys in Murray and Allen out of there. There's been a lot of reports that something weird's going on there and things just aren't run right. There's just a lot of players who don't like playing for someone, and it's crazy because when Texas A&M came into the conference and they had the success that they did and made it to the SEC title game and this and that. You really thought that it looked like he had things under control, and he went from the top of the top to all of a sudden now he's on the hot seat again. And I think he's the one that you could really watch because things with him seem to get so out of control at times. You could see them the part where they could either have a great season or an awful season, and he'll just start calling people out, and they could just lose all these people. I think he's such an intriguing name to watch it. And, a lot of people, Butch Jones is such a hot topic for discussion because nobody really knows what to do or say about him. So many people like to say, if you actually look at it, he hasn't done too bad at Tennessee and this and that. Well, I would be the person who tends to agree with you that he is on the hot seat because at the end of the day, people grow wary. And he just had a guy in Joshua Dobbs who a lot of these fans and boosters and universities will kind of give the coach the benefit of the doubt until they get their really good quarterback, and then we'll see what they can do. And when you get that Joshua Dobbs and you still don't do anything other than beat Florida for the first time in 10, 12 years, whatever it was, people are going to start getting upset and getting itchy to try to make a change.
Speaking of 10, 12 years, it's been since 2007 that Tennessee made the SEC title game. Florida's made it in that time. Georgia's made it in that time. South Carolina has made it in that time, and a program like Tennessee has not. You want to talk about a reason to fire a dude? You're staring at it right there, especially when you see just how atrocious the SEC East has been over the last couple years. Like, the Dave Dorn case over in the ACC, you know what? If you're NC State, you can forgive Dave Dorn in 3 seasons for not beating out Florida State, Clemson, and Louisville for the ACC Atlantic title. You can't forgive Butch Jones for not being able to beat out those Georgia teams and those Florida teams.
It's the same thing. It's the same thing in the Coastal for the ACC. I mean, it's been so down and so tough. There really is no excuse for a coach like, for instance, Mark Richt. If he can't win the Coastal in the next maybe 2 years with as down as it's going to be, then there's really not a ton saving you. Especially in the ACC this year, we all know we're going to see a huge drop-off in quarterback play. They lost a bunch of guys, and last year the reason why the conference flourished so much is because all these quarterbacks that we had there. College football is such, and really professional football too, we all know that success really is hinged a lot of the time on who do you have a quarterback. It's really tough to win without one. And so now that all these teams are losing these guys, who knows what N'Kosi Perry is. But if Mark Richt can't win that Coastal in the next 2 years, all of a sudden he's going to find himself on the hot seat, especially just because, like I said, people grow wary. And if you don't have any kind of results, we talked about it a little bit yesterday. It's wild that Miami has never won that division because it's just so weak. Like you said, it's one thing to forgive losing out to Florida State and Clemson and Louisville. It's a completely other to be losing out to Duke and Pitt and all those guys.
And I think if I'm a Miami fan, if that trend continues for the next couple years, the one thing I kind of point at and I get a little frustrated, I mean, Miami fans obviously have a very high opinion of their program. And, outside of certain delusions, there's, of course, Miami is Miami. And if I'm a sane, logical Miami fan, the one thing that I think would be a legit complaint if this keeps up and he doesn't make the conference game is, hey, remember Paul Johnson, that guy you used to steady beat over at Georgia? He's made this thing about 4 times. What do you mean you can't make it? What do you mean we can't go?
Well, if he can't, obviously the narrative around Richt is just going to grow that he just can't win the big game. And I saw people going at it on Twitter about it the other day about how, well, let's see what Richt is doing. The typical Miami delusion of Alabama can't even beat us in recruiting right now. Richt is rolling, blah, blah, blah. And I say, hold on now. He did the same exact thing at Georgia. He's always been able to recruit, and he still couldn't do anything with it. So if you get to Miami and you're in a weak division like the Coastal, and you get all these top-notch guys, and you still can't win the big game, at what point does Miami say, hey, in our minds, we're still Miami, 10-2 and 9-3 isn't going to be good enough every year? Who's to say that if 10-2 or 9-3 are going to be good enough to win the Coastal? I don't know. I would assume if Miami went 10-2, they'd probably win the Coastal, but who knows? And at what point is that enough for Miami fans to say, I don't care who you're bringing in the recruit wise, and we don't. If you can't win the Coastal at Miami, then that's at least where we need to start of our level of excellence to hold your coach to.
Yeah, but that time has not come yet for the ACC. It hasn't come yet for Mark Richt. The Coastal, sure, it needs to figure itself out, but the Coastal last year provided some much-needed depth for a conference to actually be able to make the argument that it's the best league in the country. Let's get you caught up, folks. This is Why You Were Sleeping.
Hello. Good morning. Wake up. Wake up. Wake me up. Good morning. Good morning.
What happened last night?
All right, let's roll with some baseball scores, shall we? We will start with my Tigers, actually, who got themselves a decent little win last night. 9-3 over the Kansas City Royals. 4-3, the Pirates over the Milwaukee Brewers at PNC Park. 12-1, it's the Orioles all over the Texas Rangers in Baltimore. The Reds lose at home 11-2 to the Diamondbacks. The Fish lose at home 5-2 to the Phillies. 5-0, that's the Cardinals shutting out the Mets at Citi Field. It's 4-5, the Blue Jays over the Red Sox in Fenway Park. 5-1, the Cubbies beat the Braves in Atlanta. back-to-back homers in the third inning, if I am not mistaken there. It's 1-0, the Dodgers over the White Sox in Chi-Town. 6-3, the Yankees defeat the Minnesota Twins in Minnesota. 2-6, 6-2, should I say, the Astros over the Mariners in Houston. 9-7, the Rockies at home over the Padres. It's the Rays going on the road and getting a win against Oakland. 4-3, Tampa Bay. 4-3, Washington, as they go to Los Angeles and get a win from the Angels of Anaheim. And it's 2-1, the Giants over the Indians. We got a lot more coming up for you, including a brief little discussion about a pretty big blockbuster trade in the MLB. And, of course, the Power Five and the American Athletic Conference saying, yeah, we maybe want a piece of that. Stick around. It's on the other side of this. It's Wake Up War Chant, 97.9 ESPN Radio.
Wake Up War Chant on 97.9 ESPN Radio is presented by TNT Golf Cart Supercenter, your one-stop shop for all your outdoor entertainment. Here's Ryan Kelly.
Welcome back to Wake Up War Chant, 97.9 ESPN Radio, brought to you, of course, by our friends at For the Table, Madison Social, Township, and Central. Did want to tell you, we don't often talk about Major League Baseball on this show, at least not in depth, but I feel like we would be a little remiss as a morning sports talk show trying to get you caught up if we did not talk about, good Lord, what a trade the Yankees and the White Sox had last night. That's Frazier and Robertson heading from Chicago over to the New York Yankees. Of course, infielder Todd Frazier, right-handers Tommy Cannell, David Robertson. It's the White Sox who are going to get some prospects from the Yankees. I do think it's amazing, and it can turn like that in sports, and we've had that conversation before, in that so many power programs and power franchises throughout the 2010s have been non-factors. And, I mean, heck, let's talk about Laker fans who are celebrating winning the Summer League like they've won another NBA title. Let's talk about, Notre Dame had that magical little run in 2012, and they've been nothing really outside of that this decade. Let's talk about the Yankees, who outside of that World Series that they won at the beginning of the decade have really kind of been a non-factor. And in a matter of 365 days, the Yankees went from they've got some young pieces and it might take a while for them to get together. And now look at them. It's amazing to me how quick things can turn in baseball. How you can go from, I just don't know, or, they've got some young pieces, to, hey, let's get some trades and try to make a run in October. It fascinates me beyond end, but I'll tell you this. They just got a lot better. And the White Sox just went to full-on fire sale. Not that they haven't needed to for a while. I mean, I'll never forget the chuckle. If you want to have a chuckle, I think it's the USA Today's predictions from 2 years ago. It's a hashtag freezing cold take if you want it. 106 wins for the White Sox. They finally got it. And Chris Sale's going to be great, and he's not going to, cause problems in the clubhouse. And you want to talk about two teams going in two different directions. It's something else. Hey, if you like yourself some brew, you might want to head on over to Township this evening. It's Winstein Wednesday. Of course, you can get yourself a nice liter of beer. Yes, I said a liter of beer. Let me run that by you one more time. A liter of beer. Have you ever drunk a liter of beer? I see a head nod. I will say that. For a heck of a price. It's Proof Lager this week. So that's supporting a local brewery that is supporting the good guys at Township. Head on over there. Have yourself a great time. American Athletic Conference Media Days headed on this week. And, of course, their big push this week has been P6. They have a logo. Kind of looks like their own logo with their own type mark, all that. P6, and of course we all know what that means. It means Power 6 conferences. They're going to try to make that push really, really hard, and I don't blame them at all. Because perception is reality, and perception is There's only one group of 5 conference that can even come close to hanging with the actual Power 5, and that's the American Athletic Conference. You can say what you want about the bottom of the league, but South Florida's done well for itself. Houston has become the ultimate poaching ground for head coaches at bigger schools in Texas. Kevin Sumlin, now Tom Herman, folks seem to go from that place like crazy. And now you see them putting money into their facilities. You see them building a new stadium. You see them trying their best to get out or at least get into the Power 5 with the American, because they know that they don't want to be a minor league farm system for big boys, for Power 5 programs. They want a piece of that pie. If they can consistently be good with a couple different head coaches, well, why can't we just hang with it? South Florida, Central Florida, probably to a certain extent looking for the same. Central Florida, of course, trying to rebuild themselves after George O'Leary kind of tanked them into the ground, but a lot of people love that Scott Frost hire at the time. And the irony is Scott Frost leaves Oregon to go to Central Florida, and Willie Taggart leaves South Florida to go to Oregon. This is a place that I really don't think wants to be the minor leagues. And, I'm interested to see what they do over the next couple of years. Now, nothing's going to happen till that college football playoff, that initial TV contract runs out in 2025. If they want a piece of the pie, they got to change it then. It's not going to happen right away. But for things to happen like this in college football, you have to set a narrative over time. The narrative we talked about of the SEC being the best conference, when Florida started that streak in 2006 of them winning all those bowl games and those national titles in a row, it didn't immediately start right there. People didn't immediately say, well, Florida beat Ohio State, so the SEC must be the best conference, and all of their fans should chant those letters at games. It didn't happen right there. So I'm curious, and I also think it's good that the AAC is doing this, because if you were going to expand the power conferences, there was only one more conference you were going to do it to, and that was the American. It wasn't going to be the Mountain West. It wasn't going to be any of those other guys. And plus, I tend to think that if this doesn't happen, the conference is going to fail, because Houston's going to try their darndest to get into the Big 12, and I think eventually the Big 12 will look for a dance partner in them, because Texas will probably want them. South and Central Florida will find somebody to go to. They'll find somebody. Those are big enough universities with enough money in them to where something will happen there. SMU, say what you want about their last 30 years, that's a program with pride. They'll do what they have to do. I think there's enough here to where this needs to happen or that conference is going to fail.
Yeah, I don't think it's happening, and I think that conference will fail. I think you'll see those teams get poached out by the bigger conferences. If anything, college football is trending in the opposite direction of expansion of the Power 5 leagues, if you will. I just don't see a world in which the AAC is deemed a Power 6, I guess, like you said it would be. I think it's much more probable that those teams get poached out by the bigger conferences than it is for there to be a Power 6.
And I'm with you that if those guys do end up in power conferences, which I think they do, I think we end up making super leagues. That's what's going to happen here. You're going to have a bunch of 16-team super leagues. You're going to get split up into quadrants almost like the NFL is. You're going to play a different quadrant every year as a part of your schedule, complete with the quadrant that you're already in. Then you might have a little mini playoff in your own conference, and then the college football playoffs themselves. You're marching towards something like this. But from a conference standpoint, not from the school standpoint, because, I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm sure Houston's probably still flirting with the Big 12. I'm sure South Florida and Central Florida are still weighing their options. Don't get me wrong. I don't think they're all waving the flag and chanting AAC. But I think from the league office perspective, this is the right way to go about things. This is the smart way to do things, because this is the only way that this grand experiment that you went on a couple years ago is going to survive.
Well, yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, how else do they get notoriety and attention for the conference other than to try to promote it? These guys, at the end of the day, those teams are all going to be about themselves. Everyone knows that. Like you said, it's not necessarily that they're waving the white flag on the conference, but if USF were to get a call from one of the Power 5 conferences, they'd probably bolt. And it is what it is. I mean, everyone, you can say you want to be included as a Power Six, but really what they're saying is we want to be taken into that discussion as our own program. We don't want to have to go 12-0 every year to even be in the discussion of being in the college football playoff. It's a tough road, and I think you've seen it with Houston at least. There's been a lot of chatter of them getting out of there. And we'll see what happens. Like you said, it should be interesting to see. But at the end of the day, I would say that the non-Power 5 conferences are heading towards their ultimate demise.
Yeah, and it's getting to that point where we're almost playing a completely different game. And the folks who want to be all in have to figure out if they want to be all in. I was talking with an administrator in college sports up in Charlotte, and just the idea and the things that you're being asked to do in compliance or in sports info or just in behind-the-scene roles in college football are starting to widen so much further in terms of Power 5 versus Group of 5 versus 1AA FCS versus D2 versus D3. The gap is widening to where it's almost, if you're a compliance or an info director or whatever in FCS or in the Group of 5, you are trying desperately, even sometimes if it's a step back, even if things like that happen, to get into the Power 5 right now, because it's getting to the point where in a couple years, it might not barely even be the same job. And for that, you have to take a long, hard look for those FCS schools and those D2 and those D3 schools. Is it worth it for us to play football? Is it worth it for us to make money, at least in the way we're doing it? Because, Wisconsin, Whitewater, and Mountain Union and places like that have shown that you can have quote-unquote power programs in smaller leagues. But the idea of running it the way that it's being run, it's going to be a long, hard look in the mirror for some of these Group of 5 teams come soon. And that's why I do applaud the Americans' effort in that you got to get there somehow. You got to fight through somehow. More after this. It's Wake Up War Chant, 97.9 ESPN Radio.
Yes, Florida State just landed a 5-star commitment.
I don't see that anywhere online. How did you get that news so fast?
I'm on the new warchant.com app. I get news updates and scores pushed to my phone instantly.
How much does it cost?
It's free. Just go to iTunes or the Google Play Store, type in Warchant, and install it on your phone. That's it.
A free app that keeps me constantly up to date on Florida State sports and recruiting? Wow, that makes it incredibly easy to follow my Seminoles and never miss out.
With the app, you'll also get quick access to all the stories and features on Warchant, including the ever-popular message boards that feature thousands of fans talking about the Noles.
Warchant.com, your ultimate Seminole source.
Wake Up War Chant on 97.9 ESPN Radio is presented by TNT Golf Cart Supercenter, your one-stop shop for all your outdoor entertainment. Here's Ryan Kelly.
I love the colorful clothes she wears and the way the sunlight plays upon her hair.
If you take a look at the front page of warchant.com right now, you got a good story from Ryan Clark about some former Seminoles who've made it back to campus for Live for Life yesterday, who, by the way, exceeded their goal for Kids First Fun. So congrats to the Florida State football team for doing that. But Dalvin Cook and Travis Rudolph both made their presence known there yesterday. Dalvin in all Minnesota gear. Looks good. Looks like he's ready to play some football. Of course, Travis Rudolph signed to the Giants at this point. Overall, good stuff. Great event. Fun to go to. If you've never been able to go out, look at that thing, or donate, do it. Donate to Kids First. I'm not often a call to action guy, but it's a good cause, and it's worth your time. So make sure you're doing that. Decades of Dominance also on the front page of warchant.com, and that includes offensive line. We're wrapping it up today. The last 3 decades of dominance vote is today. We're voting on the best center in FSU history. There'll be some debate. There's some good stuff on that, but kind of in a retrospect, looking at this, wow, what a team that Florida State can put together over just about anybody. A quarterback in Jameis Winston, a linebacking core in Derek Brooks, Marvin Jones, and Telvin Smith, Peter Bulwer and Andre Wadsworth at ends, Dalvin Cook, Nick O'Leary, Sebastian Janikowski. Like, I'm just thinking about if you actually fielded a team with all these guys in their prime, you'd be hard-pressed to find, 2, 3, 4 schools that could beat the all-decade team that Florida State has? I think the real question is, at the end of the day, which decade will we say brought the most talent to Florida State? That's the argument that I think over the next couple years, as those early 2000s, those 2012, 2013, 2014 guys continue in the league, I think that's the argument that we're going to start having in a couple years because, Florida State loved to tout for a long time. Every offensive starter we had in the 13 national championship game is now playing in the NFL. And every guy on this side of the ball is doing this. And that was a big talking point for a long time, and it's really impressive. But I want to know in 5, 6, 7 years just how well a lot of those guys do in the National Football League. Because I think at the end of the day, the legacy of those teams compared to those 90s teams will partially be shaped by it.
I agree, but I also think the issue kind of with looking at things like that is as you see time and time again, as time goes on, the athletes, they just become bigger, faster, stronger. And not to mention just with the recency bias, of course, but it's tough for me to imagine that these athletes don't just keep growing in the right direction. So when you say talent, it's hard to really gauge that because a lot of people would argue that the talent level in college football has grown astronomically, obviously.
Oh, as a whole, absolutely. There's no doubt about it. And I think sometimes it makes freaks more impressive in today's football. Like Derwin James is impressive enough to have not even started a whole season and still be Sports Illustrated's best player in college football. And I don't think it diminishes what freaks before the level of athleticism as a whole in football got raised. It doesn't limit what Peter Warwick did. It doesn't limit what Dion did. It doesn't limit what some of these superstars did. But I think it just kind of makes you nod your head and go, wow, that guy really is a football player in today's football because it is so centralized, because guys are focused on just one sport. I mean, Deion Sanders, there will never be another Deion Sanders, I don't think, or a Bo for that matter. I don't think we're ever going to see another guy professionally play football and baseball and try to make it work. I don't think either organization, either in the NFL or the MLB, would want it to work. I don't think, on top of all that, it's going to work in college. I mean, there are still some two-sport athletes. You might see some football and baseball, but you'll especially never see a superstar play football and basketball at the same time the way Charlie Ward did. That's never going to happen. So, with all that being said, I think it is so impressive in today's football when a guy stands out, when a guy does give you that wow factor, because there is so much emphasis on just playing one sport, because there is so much emphasis on being specialized in a position by the time you're 6 years old, because football has kind of become a factory to a certain extent. When you can stand out in today's age, you just say, wow. And when you can stand out back then, before all those benefits and before all those things, there's merit in that as well. That's what I think is kind of cool about this team, is that in Florida State's kind of 30-year run, and this is even excluding, the 60s, the Bill Peterson era, where they kind of revolutionized offensive football in the South and college football. If you just look at from the beginning of Bowden's tenure to right now, year number 8 of Jimbo Fisher, there's finally been, I think, enough change to where you can really see 2-3 generations of what's different, of how the game has changed. I mean, the mid-2000s, to a certain extent, not to toot our own horn because we're technically a recruiting site, but Rivals and sites like it really kind of changed the game of, well, I've got to do this more so I can get my star rating up, so guys will notice me more, and they'll look at my video more, and they'll do this. We've seen that evolution, and we saw it in a time where Florida State maybe weren't getting those guys that were up to snuff on the Revolution, when the recruiting wasn't going so well in the lost decade, when things weren't completely in order. And now you see it. And now that switch has been complete. Jimbo Fisher, when we talked to him at ACC Kickoff last week, said, you know what? Biggest change in 8 years since I've been at Florida State, it's social media. It's guys getting their message across. And as much as it can get you in trouble, it can also get you noticed. And it can also help you out. I mean, if you are in the football media, you will randomly get kids tweet at you, check out my film. Look at this. Look at this. And, you know, so sometimes it does just kind of seem like, yeah, that's somebody just trying to plug their stuff. But the thing is, they're doing the smart thing. They're doing the thing that if you want to get your tape out there, if you want to get your film out there, you have to have your own voice. I mean, we can make fun of the Twitter accounts all we want, and we can chuckle at, you know, please respect my decision, and, you know, the long notes posted as pictures on Twitter. We can chuckle and we can have fun with it all you want, but you look at the retweet and the favorite numbers on those things, and you look at the mentions on those things, and it's by the dozens. There are Hollywood celebrities that tweet sometimes that don't get as much traction as recruits do. And that's what I think is so crazy about today's football, is that you can look at the freaks of then, you can look at the freaks of now, and you can argue the idea that, you know, well, this guy's better than this guy, and even though this was a different era of football, this still holds up. The process to get there has changed so dramatically just over the last 10 years, not even the last 30, that it just kind of blows my mind, especially to just see recruiting from 2010 to 2018. We're putting a bow on it after this. It's Wake Up War Chant on 97.9 ESPN Radio.
Wake Up War Chant on 97.9 ESPN Radio is presented by TNT Golf Cart Supercenter, your one-stop shop for all your outdoor entertainment. Here's Ryan Kelly.
Time to put a bow on it here. Wake Up War Chant 97.9 ESPN Radio, brought to you by our good friends at For the Table, Madison Social, Central and Township. Again, it's Winstein Wednesday over there at Township. Great deal. That's a whole liter of beer, proof lager tonight, actually, for half price, 7 to 11 p.m. Make sure you're there. But before we go, I have a great story to leave you with. This is a top 5 story to leave you with. Just the headline alone from College Football Talk is worth talking about. Man with hooker in tow charged with breaking into LSU's Tiger Stadium. I could not think of a more LSU headline, but that's awesome. WBRZ, the TV station there in Baton Rouge, says Lucian Hamilton was arrested Monday after he allegedly broke into Tiger Stadium. Hamilton wasn't alone, however, as an unidentified woman was with him as well, and said unidentified woman's profession is allegedly that of prostitute. Television stations report says, quote, according to LSU PD, officers were notified of a man and woman who were seen exiting a vehicle and walking towards Tiger Stadium, on Monday. Ugh. Police say Hamilton admitting to sneaking into the stadium by way of ladder. It wasn't my dude just looking for, oh, well, maybe this gate's unlocked. My dude was prepared. He brought a ladder to sneak into Tiger Stadium. This is the third time in 8 months that something crazy has happened at Tiger Stadium. And according to the New Orleans Times-Picayune, Monday's turn of events was, quote, the latest of at least 5 illegal entries into the school's football arena in the past year. I'm not going to infer too much here because, of course, this is Morning Drive. There's some little ears listening. But I wonder what my man was doing with a said woman of said profession trying to break into a stadium like that at night. Just me. You can go what you want to do. Go where you want to go there. Drew, thanks so much, my friend.
Thank you.
Thanks to you guys for listening. It's Mike and Mike up next on 97.9 ESPN Radio.
WarChant.com is the ultimate inside source for FSU football and recruiting. And now you can get in on the action for free for an entire month. WarChant.com is offering a risk-free 30-day trial subscription. Get full access to the #1 website covering the Seminoles just by entering the promo code WarChant30. That's WarChant30. Sign up and get in on the world's most active FSU message boards. Receive breaking news, stories from our award-winning staff, plus get exclusive interviews and videos. Just enter the promo code WarChant30. WarChant.com, your ultimate Seminole sports source.
Hey, thanks for downloading today's show. If you haven't already, why don't you rate and subscribe us? We certainly do appreciate it, and of course, we appreciate you listening anyway, so just go ahead and click that right there. You know you want to. Come on. Come on. Thanks again for letting us do the show. We love giving you all the football, basketball, baseball, recruiting, all year round. Not just football season, not just spring practice, but hopefully giving you the freshest and newest FSU content every day. Thanks, guys.